All right, welcome back to Module 2. I'm Brian Sherwin and this is Mark Ortega, and we're talking about cross-platform development with Xamarin and Visual Studio. And in this module, we're going to catch up where we left off last time, and we're going to build some iOS applications.
Yeah, so in the previous module, we built a quick Hello World type application. In this module, we're going to get a little bit more in depth on how Xamarin works, how Xamarin.ios works, the app lifecycle. We're going to start building our application and learn how to use UI table views, storyboards, MapKit within our application, because the application we're going to be building is the heritage properties application to show heritage properties in a list, to show it in a map view, and to show the details of that heritage property. So now, first off, how iOS works, Xamarin iOS works. So we have our C# code. We have Xamarin that's in between there. And Xamarin allows us to build for iOS, Android, and we can leverage that same C# code on the Windows platform. So the build and execution model is it's different on iOS than on Android and on Windows. So on iOS, you have something called ahead of time compiling. So ahead of time compiling basically is there to compile your application down to native code. So the Apple restrictions basically say that you have to have binary code in the App Store within your application, and that's essentially what Xamarin does, and that is why you need a Mac, because you need to build the application within a Mac and the Mac build host.
All right, so this is a function of Xamarin that we're actually going to compile down to native code rather than that intermediate language that .NET is known for.
Exactly. This ahead of time compiling is similar to NGen, or native code generation, that you have on the .NET framework. So it's something similar that Xamarin does to compile your IL code down to native code. Now there are some limitations on there, and some limitations are you can't use reflection.emit. So if you want to do some build some IL code on the fly and run it on the device, you won't be able to do that with iOS. And no remoting available. And there's, if you see on the slide, there's a link at the bottom. Those go straight to the Xamarin page on some of the limitations in my experience, but I haven't seen anything to block me from building an app using Xamarin and iOS. So our latest project was a barbecue that connects over Bluetooth to an iPhone to tell you the temperature of your steak. So no limitation so far that I could see of.
All right, great.
So the iOS runtime model, so essentially it works like this. So you have iOS, which is the platform. Then you have your app native code, and within there you have your mono runtime and the base class libraries from .NET. Xamarin does some really interesting things, some neat things in there where they'll compile your application and they'll remove anything that's not used to keep the file size small. So they'll still compile it down to native code, but remove any unused properties or methods, or even from their base class libraries, they'll remove it from your application. But with this, it compiles down to native code, and you have direct access into things like MapKit, UI View Controller, Health Kit, anything that is natively accessible from Objective-C. You can also access it from Xamarin using C#. And you could also do things called bindings, where you could use existing Objective-C libraries within your Xamarin application.
Gotcha. So I have the full surface area of iOS available to me through Xamarin.
Pretty much, yeah. Whatever you can do in Objective-C, you could do with Xamarin.
Great.
So now in every mobile platform, you have application lifecycles and structures. And iOS is no different. So you have one in Android, you have one in Windows. And in iOS, what you have is you're going to have your application in the foreground, and it's going to be in two states. It's going to be in active or inactive state. It could potentially go in the background, and it's going to be a backgrounded state. You're going to be in the not running state, which means obviously it's not running, and suspended state. So when the user comes in, it uses it wants to use your app. They'll start it up. You'll be in the active state. You could be in the inactive state. For example, if a phone call comes in, you could be backgrounded, or a person checks an email, or they hit the home button. You'll be backgrounded at that point in time. And then from backgrounded, you could go back to active, or you could be suspended, and then you could go into not running. So Xamarin notifies us of all these states in the app delegate, and you could get, there's some overrides in there that you could do. So the app delegate, when you have a not running state, you're going to go active. The method there is the on activated. On inactive, you have on resign activation. On backgrounded, did enter background. When you're active, you will do will enter foreground and on activated again. And then on suspended, you will get will terminate. Now, will terminate may not always fire. That's when your application will terminate after it's been suspended. So in the views, you also have some overrides in there, so you could be notified of different states. So the app delegate will call up a UI view controller, and usually you're going to be using a storyboard to build out your applications. So the storyboard will present the view and then talk to the UI view controller to have any business logic in there. So this is, Apple uses on iOS what is called MVC, or Model View Controller pattern, where a user performs an action into the controller. It then, say, for example, it changes something in the model. It's going to update the UI, which will update the view and the user, and the user sees the changes. So this is essentially your Model View Controller type pattern. That iOS, it's just built into the SDK and the platform.
All right, so a good standard MVC pattern.
Yep. So now we'll just switch over to a demo, and we will do some app lifecycle and app states. So I'm going to open up App Delegate here. I already have a project open, pre-done. I've gone in there and I've set some properties for some icons and things like that. So you'll see here that you could set some icons in your project properties. You could do some the build settings. So all that stuff is in there. But in your App Delegate is where you're going to have all the methods. So the first one we're going to do, you'll notice how we have a bunch of overrides in here. So on resign activation, did enter background, will enter foreground. So this is where you're going to get notified of all that, of all those states. So I'm going to add an on activated, and I'm just going to do a console.writeLine, active state on activated, and I'm going to replace all these. And just to have a console write line. So that way we could see how, what the flow is of when these overrides get called. So I'm going to just start the application on my iOS device. So I'm going to run it.
So if you're just getting started, this is a great place to take a look at how your iOS application is interacting with those different states along the way. It's
Exactly.
good to understand when those events are happening.
Exactly. You definitely want to understand those, when those are happening. Here you see the app is running. Let me maximize this. The app is running on my phone. There's nothing there. It's just a default application. So I'm going to minimize this so you could see the output over here. So here you see we have a active state that's been called, and then I'm going to hit the home button, and it's going to be in the inactive state, and the background state is going to be done. I'm going to start up the app again, and you're going to see transitioning will enter foreground and on activated. And then I'm going to forcefully kill the application, and the application is now stopped. So you'll see here, we got did enter background, and then we did get the will terminate, but that's not always guaranteed to run. So those are the different states that, that happen on the app delegate side. But then on the view controller side, we have some states in here also. So you notice here there's pre-canned methods for the view lifecycle. So we could go in there and we could load any controls that we want to. We could set up anything that we need to in this view. And we have some overrides. View will appear, view did appear, and view will disappear. So I'm going to replace all these with this.
So now these are all things specific to the view, not necessarily to the app.
Yes, this is to the view.
Okay.
Or the UI view controller, to be specific. So, and this UI view controller is basically the same class from iOS. So you're using the same class there. So here we have will appear, and again I got some console.write lines, did appear, view will disappear, and view did disappear. So I'm going to run it again. And then if you notice here, you also have a did receive memory warning. So that's another override that will come in handy. We're not looking at it today, but it may come in handy if you have some graphic intensive type applications. So here, you know, the app started again. So I'm going to minimize that. And here's what you have. View did load, view will appear, unactivated, and view did appear. So that's essentially the flow of your app lifecycle and your UI view controller. Now I'm going to hit the home button. And you're going to see it went into inactive state on resign activation, did enter background. I'm going to go back in, will enter foreground on activated state. So you're probably wondering, why didn't we get will appear or view did appear and disappear again? This is because these methods only get called when the view actually appears, when you're navigating from view to view. So it won't be called when you hit the home button or when you're backgrounded or anything like that. So just be aware of that, just in case. I know that's one gotcha for some developers.
All right. So that's only when we're coming back from the suspension, we're not getting those views.
Yeah.
But if we were changing, as we changed from one view to the next, we would have those events happening for us.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So that is it for the view lifecycle. You know, so we have a good idea and understanding of what the lifecycle is, how things happen, and we could go from there. So I'm going to switch back over. And now we're actually going to start building out our application. So we're going to use something called a UI table view. And a UI table view is essentially a list view where we want to show a list of data in our application. So we're going to have data for a table view, and this table view is going to be associated with a UI table view source. Inside the table source, you're going to have a UI table view data source and a UI table view delegate. And then you're also going to have cells which are going to be used to present your data. And then eventually you're going to have a list that the user could scroll through and navigate through the application. So I'm going to switch back over and demo how to use a UI table view, or how to create one. So with that, what we're going to do is we are going to go into have some prepackaged code. So I'm just going to copy these over into here, and I'm just going to go over what they do. So we have a data file, and it's a KML file. It's about 1.5 megs in size. So you see here, this is all the KML data that we have that we want to display.
Now KML is just like a mapping.
Yeah.
Dialogue, right?
Yeah, it's just XML essentially, but it has some lat longs in there and some details of the locations. So we want to make sure that is sent to build action content. And we're just going to say to copy if newer. So once that is in, we also have a couple model in here. So we have a heritage property. So here, this defines what we wanted, the object model, and we have ID, name, so a bunch of properties, and then we have a static method to parse using XML. So we're going to need to add a reference here to system.link.xml. So click OK, and then that should work out. And then we also have services. So our service is actually what's going to go out and it's going to load the file right here. So it's again going to use linked XML, and it's going to parse the file, and then it's just going to loop through all of them and parse everything out. So from there, we need to go into our view controller and actually load it. So we're going to go in here, and the view did load. We're going to change the implementation to step 1. We're going to add a list. And we're going to do a view did load, and we're just going to load the properties right here. So you can see we're using async await. So, we don't block the UI thread, and then we just load up the properties as we go here. So I'm going to set a breakpoint. I'm going to run it. And it's going to compile.
All right, so we've taken that XML file. We're loading it into just a collection of those objects, and then we're going to take that and put that into our view?
Yes.
All right.
So right now here you could see that the breakpoint hit. We have 136 items in here in our properties, and so we know everything's working and loading up. So I'm just going to stop that because we're not actually showing anything. So now in the next thing is we want to actually show data in the table view. So we're going to open up our main storyboard, and we're going to let that load. And again, it's connecting to the build host to actually render this. I'm going to zoom out a bit. I'm going to go in the toolbox. I'm going to add or grab the table view there. The first thing I want to do is view the document outline. And I'm going to delete this view. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to add a table view. And I'm going to delete the last 2 table view cells. Then the table view, I want to name that. So you can see here, we have standard property items that we can name it. So I want to name it table view properties. I'm going to hit enter.
So those properties not being properties of Visual Studio, but these are the actual properties that we're tracking from our KML file.
Yes.
Okay.
It will get a little bit confusing with so many properties in here. So the next thing I want to do is I want to grab this cell, and I want to set the identifier. So the identifier is so we could reuse the table cells, and we're going to change it to, or set it to heritage property cell. Make sure I spelled that right. And then from there, we're going to set the basic style, or the style, to basic. So you can set it to a few different styles. You see, if we set it to basic, it has a title, so you have one label that you could set. And if you set it to subtitle, you have a subtext that you could set in there. So we're going to set it to basic for now, and then we're going to save that, and then we're going to close it. And then...
So that was just setting a template for what we're going to display in that field.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So in the table views, we have a heritage properties table view source. And this is the table view that I mentioned during the slide. And essentially here, this is our table view source that inherits from UI table view source. So we're going to contain a list of table items, and we pass that through our constructor. And then we have a cell identifier. So the cell identifier is the same one I used in the storyboard. And then there's a lot of overrides in here that you could do. So if you just do an override, you're going to see a whole bunch of things in here. You know, there are more overrides that you could do to customize the table view some more. And the Xamarin developer documentation, there's lots of it on how to do it. But for now, we're just going to say you have to override this to say how many rows there are in the section. We know there's only one section, and we know the total rows are the table items that we passed in. So you could separate the table view by sections, but for now in this demo, we don't need that. And then we also have a get item, which essentially just goes in, gets an item by index into the internal list. And this is where all the magic happens to actually display the data. So we have tableview.dequeue reusable cell. We send in the cell identifier, and we say we get the item, the current item, and we just do some, I guess you could call it manual data binding here. So in our iOS view controller, what we want to do is we want to add the view did load to the table properties. So here if you remember in the storyboard, we called it table view properties. We want to set the source to heritage properties table view source, this.properties, because those are the properties that we loaded. And then we want to reload the data. So I'm going to clear this breakpoint. I'm going to start it. And eventually it will.
Again, so it's doing that compile, it's sending it over to your device.
Exactly.
To do this build, okay.
So now let me switch over to my Mac here. And here we go, we see a bunch of items that we've set in the table view source. And there's a little bit of lag on the streaming here, but it's actually quite smooth and fast on the device. So now, to customize this a bit more, what we want to do is we want to set the style of the storyboard. So as we want to show the, say for example, we want to show the lat long, so we want to show the subtitle. So we're just going to go in here. Wait for the storyboard to load.
So we're going to go back and modify that template for what we're going to display so that we have now two pieces of data and have a richer view.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
And that template can be customized even further on our own, right?
Yeah, you could customize it further. Right here, I'm going to do a subtitle for the cell. So we have a subtitle that we could set. And then you could also do things like accessory. You want a detail, so it adds a little icon there, or a disclosure indicator for a little arrow. So we're going to save that, go back into our table view source, and I'm going to replace this with number 4, get cell. So basically here what we're doing is we're setting the detail text label, and we're just formatting the latitude and longitude right here. So now if we run it again, and just wait for it. You'll see the changes pop up there.
All right, great. So that gives me more information about each of those individual properties.
Exactly. So now the next step is we want to see the details, and we will figure out how to do that. So we quickly, created a UI table view. We showed some data, created a custom, but now we need to navigate using the storyboards. So storyboards has something called segues, and in there, what you're going to do is you're going to set the segues on how everything navigates from end to end. So you're going to have a navigation view controller that's going to have our table view as our root view, and then it's going to go into a details view. So now we'll just switch back and start doing that. So I'm just going to close all these. Actually, go back to the storyboard. I'm going to zoom out so we can see. And I am going to take a navigation controller and I'm going to drag it out here. So you notice the navigation controller comes out with two little screens. One is the navigation controller, and then the other one is the controller that's going to be pushed into the navigation controller. So that way it knows which view to show first, and then you can navigate from that view to another view, which is going to be our details view.
All right.
So now that that's ready, what you want to do is you want to control click and drag and into our table view, and you want to set the relationship as root. So now our table view is root, and I'm going to rearrange these a little bit. And then this one right here, this segue, you want to set it to navigation. This identifies which is the first one, the first view controller that comes in, and we want our navigation view controller to be first. And then from our cell, we want to control click into the details, and we want to push into there. And you notice now we have a nice back button. We have a root view controller in the title. We have a title up here. So this is how we set up our navigation. And then the details view, we want to set that up. So say, for example, we want to label. And again, we just pop that in and make that happen. So I'm going to save that, close that. And I actually have one that's already ready for us.
So as you build out that storyboard, it's taking care of building the navigation menu along the top to move forward through my application, or as I move forward through my application, it's taking care of that moving back up to the navigation menu automatically for me, right?
Exactly. And that's one of the nice things about using the storyboards and using the navigations is it'll handle a lot of it for you. So if you look at here, I copied it over, I reopened the storyboard, and just zoom in. And this is what we want our details view to look like. So we want to show the ID, we want to show the latitude, the longitude, and then we're going to have a web view in there because some of the data that comes back in that KML file is HTML. So we want to show that in a web view so we could see some details of that heritage property. So I'm going to save this, I'm going to close it, and now we're going to go back into storyboard because we need to set a few properties. So down here, let me zoom out, we want to set the identifier. So we want to set this to segue details. And then we want to set this, the name to LBL ID. And we want to set this to LBL lat, this to LBL long, and this to just web view. So this way we can reference them from our code. Now if you notice, we have a little red box in here saying that the parent view controller needs code behind. So we haven't actually set our view controller here to have a code behind files. So I'm going to click the view controller here, and I'm going to create a name called Heritage Properties Detail View Controller. Hit enter.
So that's wiring it up to the code behind class that's going to fill this particular view?
Exactly, exactly. And if you notice here, we now have a Heritage Properties Detail View Controller, and the designer code is all wired up internally now. So that was the error it was giving us before. So if you set a custom class in for the view controller within here, it'll automatically create the class for you.
Great.
So now we're going to open up the view controller that we just created, and we're going to replace the implementation with one. So we're going to insert some code right here, and we're going to have the selected heritage property, the one that's selected from the list view, and then we're on the view did load. We want to set all the information on the labels and the web view and everything from the selected heritage property. So now to get that working, we need to go into our iOS view controller, our main view controller, and after the view did load, we're going to add this here. And what it did is we added a prepare for segue right here. And this is why we've set up the, if you remember in the storyboard, we set the segue details. So this is exactly why you need it. So you could identify which segue is being clicked and then going from there. So here we know that if it's segue details, we set the destination view controller. We grab the view controller as a heritage property. Heritage property details view controller. And let me just grab that. And then from there, we grab the item that is selected. We set the selected heritage property, so when it loads, it actually knows what to set the details to. So then I'm going to start that.
All right, so we got the segue. We took the detail of the record that they selected. We're passing that then to the view, and then the view is going to, on the load event, or the view did load, it's going to take those details and load it into the view to display those on the detail page, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So here we go. We have the application loaded up. I'm going to select this one, and then it's going to navigate in. I'm going to hit the back button, and then working as expected. So there are the details in the web view. We have the ID, the latitude, the longitude, and now we have a list view showing details, navigating back and forth, and we can now look at a map. So essentially, with a map, it's fairly easy to use MapKit within iOS. So you have your map kits, and there's two ways to set up maps. So you could do a map within your application, or you could go outside to the native map application. So ideally, you would want to do a native map, or you want to embed the map within your application. And then to do a map, it's as simple as newing up a new MK map view, and then setting the view of your UI view controller to the map, and then you get a map displayed on your device. So you have different types of maps. You have standard, satellite, hybrid. So it's similar to Bing Maps if you've used that on Windows Phone. And then to add an annotation, and an annotation is pretty much the same thing as a pushpin. So you do add annotation, MK point annotation, set the title, and set the coordinate of it to tell it where to place. So now let's switch back over to the demo and actually write out some code to get this going. So the first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to copy some files over from the resources. So I'm just going to copy this in. It's going to ask me to overwrite. So essentially, we're copying these pins and this list so we could switch views. And then we want to make sure they are bundled resource, which they are. So Xamarin automatically sets it to it. And I'm going to go back into our storyboard. And we're going to add a button, a bar button item into our navigation bar. So we're going to do the set the image. We're going to set the image to pin. And I'm going to get rid of this text. So now we have a button up there. And we're going to name the button btn map list. We're going to save that, and we're going to go back to our main view controller. So now that is ready. So we're going to add some member variables. So for the list, the map and the list, if it's just a Boolean to see if it's visible, we're going to add a using statement here. And then we're going to add in view did load a button map list. We're going to add a click event. This one does have a click event, not like the other button. It has touch up inside to get a click event. And then we're just going to load the map. If the list view is visible, we're going to swap it. So we're just going to swap in and out of map view and list view. And then in here, we're going to set the map up from here. So I need to copy this. And we're going to set the delegate to a heritage property map view delegate. So we need to copy those files into our project. And we also have a annotation. So these are custom classes that we have in here. A custom annotation, basically we have this so we can put a pushpin, but we can associate a heritage property to it. And then heritage property map view delegate. So this one here is where we get the information on when the pushpin is clicked. We want to tap on that. When it's tapped, we want to get notified. And we have to get the view for the annotation. So this is the code that does it here. We want to show the pin. We want to make sure we dequeue it from right here. And if it's not dequeued, we want to just create a new one. And this, again, is for memory optimization. And then we want to set the accessory from here, so a detailed disclosure. And we want to set the pin color to red and to show the callout when it's tapped. When the callout is when it's tapped, then we want to set a notification to our action right here. So now we need to set this up in our iOS view controller. So now in here, in the view did load, we have that, and notice we're missing a load map data, so we're going to just add that in. And this is what's actually going to load our data inside the map. So I'm just going to set some using statements here. And then what it's going to do, it's going to loop through all the items. And then we have some code in here to actually zoom in on the annotations. So we're grabbing all the top left and bottom right coordinates, latitude and longitude, and then we are setting a region in there. And while we're doing that, we're adding annotations and heritage property annotation so we could view it on the map. So I'm going to run that.
All right, so what we just created was another view of the data. So we have the list view and we're going to have the map view. And the map's going to put push pins all over the place for me to pick those properties. And when I click on one of those pins, we created a delegate that's going to take us to that details view of that property, right?
Exactly. So then this is where the delegate is. So the delegate is right here. It's a different type of delegate from what .NET developers are used to. So it's just the same naming convention. But a delegate is basically a class that you assign to this object. So you assign to the delegate property. And you have more functionality within that delegate to customize the map view or do different things. So it is a little bit different. The name is the same, but conventionally it's different because that's what they use on the iOS.
All right, well, let's see it in action.
So here's the application. Again, we got our list view still working. We can navigate back and forth. We'll swap over to the map view, and you can zoom in on the map. You can click on one of those, and you can navigate back and forth.
Great.
So there you go. So that, in a nutshell, is how to add maps. Now, there is a lot of code in there. The code will be made available. But in a nutshell, we now have a fully functional application to show heritage properties from the town of Oakville in a list view, in a map view, and showing the details of the heritage property. So to recap, essentially what we've done is we've gone through how Xamarin iOS works, application lifecycle. We used UI table views, UI storyboards, map kits to build a fully functional iOS app using Xamarin and Visual Studio.
All right, so that wraps up Module 2, where we looked at the iOS applications. We'll come back and do Android. We'll cover the same kind of material, but we'll actually start breaking into some code reuse. So we're not doing this 2 or 3 times. We'll start sharing some of this code between our applications.
Yep.
So we'll see you in Module 3.